We begin today's shiur 13 lines from the top. Before we begin the shiur, let us glance at the side of the Gemara where we have a topic heading, which reads, Deos Amoroyim. We'll see different Amoraic opinions, Behityachasut, with regard to L'Kohen Shegiresh Ishto, a Kohen who divorced his wife, V'lamros Chiyuv Harchoka, and in spite of the obligation to maintain a distance, Shaloi L'Shalem Law Choyvois B'tzur Yeshira, that he should not pay her debts that he, the husband, owes to his wife in a direct fashion. Ovar V'Shilem Law Be'atzmo. What happens if he violated the halacha and did pay her directly? So we turn to the Gemara text, bearing in mind, of course, that this sugya is a continuation of the discussion that we had left off in our previous shiur, that a Kohen, once he divorces his wife, he is not allowed to remarry her, and since that prohibition exists, we don't want them to be in close proximity of one another. The Gemara, Tonu Rabbanan, 13 lines from the top, Lova Heimena Benichse Avia, a Kohen who had divorced his wife, and while they were married, he happened to have borrowed money from his wife. You might ask, how does a wife have independent funds for her to loan her husband? So that's incorporated in the expression Benichse Avia. These are properties that the woman had brought into the marriage from her father's home that are essentially considered hers. We call this nichse malug, where in the course of their marriage, a husband is allowed to benefit from the property's produce, its dividends, but not the property itself, not the principal. Anyway, the woman had loaned her husband from her properties, and now he has to pay that back, but now he divorced her. This is a Kohen that divorced his wife. Eino nifras elo al yedei acher. Payback is only through an intermediary. Rashi says, Eino nifras himeno al yedei atzmo. She should not go to the husband and collect the money. Elo yikrevu shelo yikrevu b'dvarim. We don't want them in their speech and their talking to one another to become overly close, and of course that could lead to a forbidden situation. Omer of Sheshes vi osu l'kamon l'dino lo mizdakekinon lehu. If a husband and wife, former, because he divorced her, if they come to us for us to intervene to enable her to collect from him, we do not enable that. We don't deal with that. Rav Papa Omar Shamuti Mishamtino. If they if the woman attempts to collect directly from her husband, we will excommunicate them. Rav Huna Braid Rav Shomar Negudi Menagdinon. We will lash them. In other words, you can see an increase in severity of attitude, where Rav Sheshes says we as a court will not enable her to, we won't deal with the case, i.e., we won't enable her to collect directly from him. Rav Papa says excommunication is what is needed here, and Rav Huna says we'll even lash them. Omar Rav Nachman, Tana Be'evel Rabossi. The following Tanaic source appears in a Tanaic work called Evel Rabossi. This is a Tanaic work which is also known as Maseches Smochus, which is a euphemism. It refers to matters that are, we'll say, death-related issues. So the source says, Bamed Vamurim, Shinizgar Shemina Nisuin. This prohibition is only if the couple had actually consummated their marriage. They were nisuin, they had reached the avol, but if they had not reached the final stage of marriage, kishin is garsha mino erisin, if their original marriage was only at the first stage of marriage, where he had offered her money, but they had not entered the chuppah and had intimacy with one another, nifras alidei atzma she'ein libo gasba. She can receive payment from her husband former husband, directly, because their level of affinity for one another had not reached a climax, so that the fear that we had before of them coming too close to one another wouldn't take place. They had never really achieved what's called libo gaspa, his deep affinity for her. Hahu orus v'arusoso dasu l'kamei derava, a case like this of a Kohen who had married a woman but not consummated the marriage. They were an orus and arusa, and he had divorced her from that first stage. And they came to Rava, Yosef Rav Ado Bar Matona Kamei. So this couple is coming, each one. So let's say they're coming together to Rava, and Rav Ado is seated there. Now, in terms of Gemara structure, you can see a Roman numeral number 1 with a house marking, and a few lines later there's a squiggle underlined Iko di Amri. Notice on the side, under the Nosei, Mivneh heading, these are Shnei Lishonos, 2 versions, Alodot Kohen Orus Shigiresh Arusa, so a Kohen who had been an orus to his woman, to his wife, the arusa, ubala shalem loni, he's coming to pay her. Haim lahamid shliach beinehem shlote tashlum yoshir beinehem. Should we set up an intermediary between them so that he doesn't end up paying his arusa, former arusa, directly? So, in the first version of the story, Uki Rava Shlucha Bentayu. Rava saw that the Orus wants to pay money to the Arusa, so he set up an intermediary between them. Omar Le Rav Ado Bar Matona, Rav Ado, who was seated there, said, V'amar Rav Nachman Tona Bevo Rabosi V'chulei, etc. Was it not so that Rav Nachman taught this Tanaic source, he popularizes Tanaic source that qualified the issue of having an emissary, not necessary over here. Omar Le, so Rava responds, Kochazinon, I noticed that in this particular case, the Kogaisi Bahadodi, they're exceptionally fond of one another. Rashi says, the Gaisi Bahadodi, Makir Kritzos, they recognize each other's gestures, and I don't want to take a chance. They seem like they're going to get it on together too well. And a Kohen who divorces his Arusa as well, he's Ozer, he is forbidden to take her back. Iko di Amri, Velo Uki Rava Shliach B'Entay. Another version of this story is that Rava did not set up a go-between. Omar Le Ravada Bar Matona. Should we not set up a go-between, some type of emissary that will collect the money from the orus, from the husband, and give it to the arusa? Omar Le, so Rava said, Rav Nachman Tona Ba'evo Rabasi V'chulei. Rav Nachman's source from before, that we have learned that when it's a case of an orus and arusa, you don't need an emissary or a go-between. Omar Le, so Rav Ado responds, Hani milechadelo gaisi badodi. That's true when you see they don't have too much affinity for one another. Avol hani kochazinu lu de gaisi badodi. But here I see that they are very close with one another, and here, because of we'll call this exceptional circumstance, there should be an emissary between them. Now we encounter a new Mishnah, and on the side we have a Nosei Mivneh heading. This Mishnah is a Rishimas Dvorim, a list of things Shene'emonim Lohoid Aleim Al Pi Ma Shiro B'Kotnon. Someone is going to, as an adult, tell us what he saw as a minor. V'heim Mimusparim 1 through 6. Hemshech HaGemara Mutuam L'Misparim Alolu. The continuation of the Gemara will be based on the numbers that we see here. The Mishnah. Elu, and also, of course, you see a double underline in the Mishnah. This highlights the contrasting expressions. Naaman or Ein Odom Naaman. A person is either believed or not believed regarding different things. So the first list are the list of things that he is believed. Naaman Odom, let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah now. V'elu Naamanim Lohoid Begodlan Mashro Bekotnan. The following are those items or things, events that a person is believed when when an adult, to testify or tell us about what he had seen when he was a minor. One should realize, of course, that a minor per se is not accepted. It's not acceptable as a witness or as a source of information. However, here we have he is an adult, but he's telling us about that which he saw when he was a minor. Nemon Odom Lomar, number 1, Zek Sav Yodoi Shel Abba. In the event that you need to ascertain or substantiate a signature, we'll call this a signature or a document verification, and you need to verify the signatures as being authentic, so this individual can say, yeah, that signature is my father's signature. I remember how he signed things when I was a kid. And Rashi adds, and this is acceptable evidence or testimony, even if the father died when this person was still a minor. V'zek sav yodo shel Rabbi. Likewise, he can say, this is my teacher's, my Rebbe's, my Torah instructor's signature. V'zek sav yodo shel achi. Or this is my brother's signature. The case of signature verification, you can see in the Mishnah, the way we've numbered things, is all under the heading 1. We have 1, Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. These 3 examples of signature verification. The Gemara will ask, why do I need to have each case taught? We continue with number 2, Zochor Oyisi B'ploinis Shiotza Binuma V'Roisha Purua. I remember so-and-so, a woman, that when she married, when she entered her chuppah, she went to the chuppah with a hinuma, which we saw earlier in the Masechta, a couple of pshatim as to what that is. One of the pshatim was a veil, or the other one is, and the other example in Rosh Hapura, her hair was let loose down to her shoulders. These are signs of a besula marriage, and the halachic ramifications of that, of course, is with regard to the ksuba amount. So that he's telling us about a woman that she got married as a psula, and he had seen that, the evidence of that, was, we said, the veil wearing, or the hair down, let loose down to the shoulders. That's symbolic of a psula marriage, as we learned at the beginning of the parak. I remember so-and-so being taken out of school or leaving school to immerse himself before sundown in order to eat truma. If a person was tamei, and he as such cannot eat truma. Truma is the tithe given from produce to kohanim. A person must be in a state of non-defilement, so he needs to go to the mikveh and then wait for sundown, so that if this fellow tells us, I remember that guy. We were kids learning in the school, and I remember him leaving to eat truma, which would indicate to us that this person today is a Kohen, at least with regard to truma rights. Number 4, V'shoya choylek imonu ala goren. He used to receive a portion of tithes together with us at the granary. V'amokim hazeh beis hapras. A 5th point that a person can testify, that this field is a field in which a grave had been located, and as a result of our lack of knowledge concerning whatever happened there, if the field was plowed up, and that would disperse the bones throughout the field, creating a suffix tuma situation over a whole field, so that he's believed to say that this field is an area of suffix, of tuma, doubt. Ve'ad kan hoyinu bo'in b'Shabbos. And he can say that this point in this geographical point outside the city is the end of the tchum. A person on Shabbos has walking distance restrictions outside of settled areas. So he can say that this is the point, this is the edge of the tchum, we didn't go further than this. Avol ein odom ne'emon lomar. The following, he is not believed with regard to the following: derech hoya leploni b'mokom hazeh, to say that so and so had a path through this field. as of right now, we don't know. The property in question isn't assigned to so-and-so, and yet with this information, we would have to give it to so-and-so. Now, this is called afuki mamona. That means to take money or property from the possession of one and give it to someone else. For that to take place, for property transfer or financial transfer to be employed, you would have to have proper edus, proper testimony. Rashi adds, you might ask, well, what about the ksuba payment issue before, where we believed this individual to say that as a kid he saw her as a basula? So Rashi says, really, it's not that we're relying on on this individual's testimony, but rather the majority of women marry as basulos. So when you have a majority backing you up, you don't really need his information. Another thing we don't believe is Maimeru mispaid hoyo leploni b'mokom hazeh. Rashi says Maimeru mispaid mokom hoyo lo kan lahaspid meisov, that this person owned a certain section of land outside a cemetery. Shemolifin lebeis hakvoros sheloi v'lasa sham amodos u'mishavos sho'isin shiva lemeis. This involves a certain, let's say, consolation ritual that took place in the situation of a burial, and the information for our purposes concerns a plot of land that would be assigned to so and so as his being the owner of that for their family burials. They would practice this consolation ritual there. The Maimed Umispaid. The Gemara. Omar Rav Huna Brei Rav Yoshua, V'hu sheyesh godo imo. The testimony that we saw in the Mishnah is acceptable provided there is another adult with him. Utsricha. I need all three examples regarding the signature verification. De'i ashminin oviv, if I were told that the individual's testimony that with regard to father's signature that he saw when he was a minor is acceptable, I wouldn't have been able to extrapolate from that regarding Rebbe. Mishum Teshchiach Gabei, because a child is very often with his father. He sees his father's signature on a regular basis. Avol Raboi Lo, but with regard to the teacher's signature, that he doesn't see with as a great frequency. The Ashmin and Rabo, had the Mishnah revealed the reliability with regard to teacher's signature, Mishum the Islay aim say the Rabbe, because there's an element of fear which creates a certain heightened level of awareness when it comes to one's teacher. Avol oviv lo, that amo, that fear isn't present with regard to child-father relationship. V'yashminahani tarti, had I told you about these two, oviv d'shchiach gabe v'rabo d'islayim say, there are two. With regard to these two individuals, there is good reason to rely on this particular testimony. Avol ochiv, when it comes to his brother, the lesle lo ha v'lo ha, neither regularity nor fear factor. Amolo, maybe he wouldn't be trusted to recognize his brother's signature. Komash malon kevon dishkiyum shtaros midrabanan. So the Mishnah reveals that since the issue of signature verification is a rabbinic stringency, on a purely Torah level, once a document appears with signatures in it, that is considered testimony, solid testimony. There is no need on a Torah level for additional verification. However, it is required on a rabbinic level. That is, when someone puts a claim in that I don't trust these signatures, I claim they're forged. So on a rabbinic level, we insist on the verification. Hemnuhu Rabbanon b'Drabbanon. They can tell you, the Rabbanon being that they made the rule in the first place of signature verification. They can tell you that when it applies, and that it applies even to a cotton, to a minor. That his word, that means, I should be more accurate, an adult telling us that he recognizes these signatures from his childhood. Now we go to the second example in the Mishnah. Zochor yisi b'ploinus shiotza binum of Rosh Parua. My timer. Why do we rely on the testimony with regard to establishing a woman as having been a besula, a virgin, when she got married, because of her being seen by this individual while he was still a child? Her entrance to the marriage canopy with a veil, with her hair loose. Why is he believed? Is this not a case of apuki mamona? Is it not a case of money transferred, where through this testimony the woman is going to collect money that she previously did not have? So the Gemara says, Kevan de roiv nasha besulos nisois, since the majority of women marry as virgins, gilui milsa bi'almahu. What the individual here is saying to us is mere revelation of understood information. If we look at Rashi, Gilui Milsa B'Almahu, Klomar Ein Hadovar Tzorach Edus. This is not a matter that requires formal testimony. Ela Lefarsein Shiotza Hadin Loor Below Gimgum. All that the word of this, when we give this woman her 200 zuz, based on let's say, following this individual's testimony, this serves simply to make known, to publicize that what we are doing is in accordance with what the law would expect of us anyway. So it's not testimony upon which our decision is based. It rather, as the Rashi explained, based on the Gemara's words, it's simply to let known that when we do pay her the 200 zuz, we're doing so in accordance with what she should deserve, by virtue of the fact that the majority of women receive Kesubos of 200 zuz. V'shoya ish ploni yoytze mi beis hasefer litbo lechol betruma. He's also telling us that he remembers so-and-so leaving a Torah education institute, a school of Torah education, to immerse himself in order to eat truma. The Gemara asks, "V'dilmo eved kohen," who maybe what he saw was the slave of a kohen. Now, a slave of a kohen is someone who also eats from truma, and what our Mishnah is suggesting, that we're going to consider him a regular kohen. And but just because you saw him leaving a school to immerse himself in truma, maybe he's a child slave of a kohen, and when that person gets freed, this is information you can cull from the Tosfos. When that individual gets freed, he's no longer a kohen. So I'm going to be giving truma to someone who maybe shouldn't be receiving truma whatsoever. How then can we say or rely on this information to consider someone fit to receive truma? The Gemara says, well, Messiah Leila Reb Shua ben Levi. The Mishnah actually supports the teaching of Reb Shua ben Levi. The Omer Reb Shua ben Levi also loved him shilmat es avdoi Torah. It's forbidden for a person to teach his slave Torah. So if you saw the individual, the child, leaving a Torah, an elementary Torah education facility, then you know that he's not the slave of a Kohen, but he's an actual Kohen. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in such an institution. The Gemara asks, "Velo, is that really so? That it's forbidden to teach a slave of a Kohen Torah?" V'hatanya, and we have a Tanaic source. There's several pieces of information in this source. We're really interested on the second line from the top of Omid Beis, what we will see there for our discussion. The issue that this source deals with, if you see different forms of behavior, can we come to conclusions as to whether someone is a slave or actually has been freed from slavery? So the source says, Lova Heimenu Rabbi, a man borrowed money from his slave. Oshaso Rabo Apotropos, where the master made the slave an executor of his property. Oshiniach Tefillin B'fnei Rabo, or the slave put on tefillin. Now, a slave is not obligated in the mitzvah of tefillin, but here we have someone putting tefillin on in front of his master. O shekor shloisha psukim bebeis hakneses, or this slave read 3 Torah psukim in a synagogue. Harei ze lo yetze lecherus. If you see any of these things, he is not deemed to be a free man. So that if you see a slave, a master borrowing from his slave, it's not an indication that the owner had freed him. And likewise, if you see him reading Torah psukim, it's not an indication that he's been freed. So what does that mean for our purposes? That a slave is someone that can be engaged in Torah study. Here he's reading Torah psukim, verses from the Torah, and he's considered a slave. The Gemara says there's a difference. Hasam de ikri eved midaito. The eved, the slave in this particular Tanaic source where we just read with the dashed underlined phrase, this is where the eved took the initiative up on his own. In other words, he took the initiative. It's not something that was imposed on him. Ki kwamrinon, when we say that it's forbidden to teach a slave Torah, that's a case where the father or the owner would take the initiative. He is not allowed to initiate Torah instruction for his slave. So that when you hear this story of a child having left school in order to immerse himself in Truma, that means someone sent him to the school to study Torah. That's a father taking an initiative, and he would not have done that with a child that's a slave. Litpoil lechol betruma. How can we rely on this kind of testimony regarding eating of truma when the initial witnessing was when the speaker was a minor? So the Gemara says, "Betruma de Rabbanan." We're dealing with truma whose initial necessity is only rabbinic. And as we said before, when it comes to matters that are rabbinic in nature, the rabbis can tell us when to believe someone like this and when not. So since the whole realm is rabbinic, they can make the rules and tell you when they apply and don't apply. Testimony by this individual who is now an adult but telling us that when he was a child he saw so-and-so receiving tithe portions at the granary. Vidilmo Evet Kohen, who maybe he is a slave of a Kohen who went to receive the portions. And as we pointed out before, that if that is the case, once that person is freed, he's not entitled to receive tithes anymore. So how can we rely on this information to entitle the individual, the subject of the testimony, to continue receiving a portion when the one receiving it at that time might have been a slave? Tanan Kemad Yomer Ein Cholkin Truma Le'eved Elim Kain Rabo Imo. This Mishnah reflects that opinion that says a slave would not receive a portion on his own. He might receive, but only if his master is with him, and that was not the case over here. Tesanya Ein Cholkin Truma Le'eved Elim Kain Rabo Imo Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So that our Mishnah reflects the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that you don't give truma to the slave of a Kohen unless the master is there. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yochelhu Shiyomar, a slave of a Kohen can go to the granary, the site where tithe distribution takes place, and say the following: Im Kohen ani tenuli b'shvil atzmi. If I am a Kohen, then I have it coming to me in my own merit. V'im eved Kohen ani, and if I'm the slave of a Kohen, tenu li b'shvil rabbi, I want you to give me a portion of the tithes because of my master. And I'm entitled to receive on and take something on behalf of my master. B'mekom Rabbi Yehuda, in Rabbi Yehuda's community, his area, his precinct, hoyumalin mitruma liyuchsin. If you saw someone receiving a portion of truma, you would be able to consider them true Kohen, a pedigree Kohen. And now, because of that, because these 2 points are intertwined, because conclusions regarding Truma receipt had further ramifications, had Yuchasin ramifications. Yuchasin, a point we've mentioned often in our recent shiurim. This has to do with entitling someone to marry a woman of pure ancestry, pure lineage. This is so in Rabbi Yehuda's area, when you would see someone receiving truma, that's a sign he was a pedigree Kohen, and he would be entitled to marry a woman of pure descent. And therefore, you wouldn't dare give truma to the slave of a Kohen. Once again, the receipt of truma would indicate that you're of pure Jewish ancestry, and slaves are a different category. They're not Jews per se. In Rabbi Yossi's precinct, they would not come to conclusions regarding truma receipt and apply it to the realm of Yuchasin. As you can see very clearly that in Rabbi Yossi's area, they would give truma to the slave of a Kohen as well. Tanya, Omer Rabbi Ozer Rabbi Yossi, Miyomai lo he'adati. Rabbi Ozer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, tells us that in all my days and over my life, I never said testimony. Pamachas he'adati. Once I did say testimony. Now, let's skip the bracketed section momentarily. Bikshu lalos eved lekuna alpi. They almost took my information and enabled someone who was actually an eved, a slave, to be considered a kohen. So what happened over there? Chaza bi'asrei de Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi saw in the Rabbi Yossi county, in his precinct, he saw someone receiving truma at the granary distribution site. So he saw so-and-so. He was able to identify so-and-so as having received truma. Now, where did he see him receiving truma? He saw him receiving truma in Rabbi Yossi's community. The Ozav Asid B'asrei de Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Ozer Rabbi Yossi revealed what he saw in Rabbi Yehuda's community. So he went to Rabbi Yehuda's community, where the practice was to take that information of truma receipt and apply it to Yuchasin, so that in Rabbi Yehuda's community they took that very seriously. Oh, this guy that you're talking about, he received truma, so we can enable him to marry a woman of pure ancestry. You can see, of course, the problem here is that the information that Rabbi Ozer Yossi was revealing was truma receipt, but that had not taken place in Rabbi Yehuda's precinct. This individual's concerning whom he was testifying had received the truma in Rabbi Yossi's county. And in Rabbi Yossi's county, they give truma to people that aren't of pure ancestry. They give it even to the slaves of Kohanim. So there was almost a slip-up. Now, we're emphasizing here that it was an almost slip-up. If we go over the bracketed section, you'll see why that emphasis is important at the end of the day. So in the brackets, you have, in fact, information that needs correction. So now let's read through the Tanaic source again with the bracketed section. There was one occasion that I said testimony, and as a result of that, they declared so-and-so, who in truth was a slave, and viewed him as a Kohen. And now, by saying he is a Kohen, that means this guy is then going to receive Truma for the rest of his life. He'll be able to receive Truma. The Gemara asks, is it possible that Reb Ozer was responsible for a grave error to have taken place, and as a result of his testimony, someone is going to end up eating something that he should not be eating? Because this Eved, once he's freed, he becomes a regular Jew, not entitled to eat Truma. But with his testimony, they would have concluded that he's a Kohen, and he'll for the rest of his life be receiving Truma. Could that be that this great sage, this saintly individual, would be responsible? Through him, there would be this mistake? That can't be. Hashto ma behemton shel tzadikim ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi takolo al yodam. Mind you, that through the animals of the righteous, the Kodesh Baruch Hu does not allow any stumbling to take place, any mistakes to take place. And this is a reference to a couple of different passages, maybe call them Agadic passages in the Talmud, where we see that when it comes to the animals of the righteous, matters concerning eating that which is wrongful for even the animal would not have happened. So, tzadikim atzmam lo kol shekain. When it comes to the pious, the righteous ones themselves, all the more so, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would protect them from being the source of some stumbling, some mistake from taking place. Elo big shulahalo. So what happened in Rabbi Ozer Rebbe's case is that it almost happened. This slip up almost happened, that they were lahalos eved likuna al pi. And as we explained before, what happened that led to the almost slip up, but they caught it in the last moment and understood that the guy concerning whom Rabbi Ozer had testified really was a slave. But what had happened? Chozib Yasri Rabbi Yossi saw him receiving Truma in Rabbi Yossi's precinct. V'yozav Asid Basri Rabbi Yehuda, and he told about this guy's receiving Truma and he told the information in Rabbi Yehuda's precinct, where they took that. They would take that information seriously, but the mistake was caught at the last moment. Number 5, Vishamokim Hazeh Beis HaPrasu. The individual is believed to say that this field, this area, is a Sofek Tuma area. My time, why is he believed? Answer, Beis HaPras de Rabbanan. The Tuma that's imposed on a field in which a grave had once been located, and then the field was over the years was plowed up, and as a result of the plowing up, whatever remains of whatever had been in the grave was scattered all over the place, and as such we declare the whole field to be tamei. That declaration is a rabbinic declaration. Otherwise, on a Torah level, my understanding, it would be called Sofek Tuma B'Rishus HaRab. And let's assume that the field is a place that the public cuts through, walks over. It would be considered a public type domain, and as a result, it's classified as a Sofek Tuma B'Rishus HaRabim. And when you have a doubt concerning Tuma in a public type area, we are, on a Torah level, we are Mekil. You'll see there's more information about this in the Tosfos Dibur Masel Beis HaPras. But we continue in the Gemara. And the Gemara here now shows how we actually are lenient in areas regarding this field, even though that potential Tumah is present. And all of this is part of what we have listed here in marking-wise as a long answer. We're telling you that this is an area of Tumah on a purely rabbinic level. I should point out just ahead of time that if it were Tumah on a Torah level, there would be no room for any leniency. And yet we see there is leniency, and this is now illustrated. The HaRav Yehonasan Berger, Menapech Adam Beis HaPras V'holech. This Gemara is very terse, but it describes a person that has to cut through the field in order to get to the Beis Hamikdash to do his Korban Pesach. And if a person, granted the field was plowed up, so there's no real, there's no body or limbs of the body left in one place, but there might be bones. And bones, even though overshadowing them does not impose defilement, nevertheless, touching them or moving them does impose defilement. And in order to reveal if the area that you are currently traversing is defiled because of in other words, because of bone presence, you might become defiled, and a person, in order to process his Korban Pesach, cannot be in a state of defilement. We allow you to blow ahead, that's menapeach, is to blow ahead using either you get down on all fours and crawl ahead, or use a bellows to expose the dirt that's in front of you, and you'll be able to thereby expose or push aside any bones that might be in your way. So we're relying on this crude investigation method in order to allow you to do the Korban Pesach. And again, why are we relying on this? Because the whole issue is merely a rabbinic issue to begin with. Rav Yehuda bar Ami mishmei de Rav Yehuda Omar. Rav Yehuda adds another point regarding the Beis HaPras. He says, Beis HaPras sheni dash tohor, a field in which there had been a grave that had been plowed up, but had also been trampled extensively over the years, is considered tohor, completely tohor. You don't need to do the bellows or blowing treatment, because any bones that would have been left were certainly crushed, and anything that's there left would have been pulverized and is less than a barley grain in size and doesn't pose any tumah problem. The fact that we are saying all of this is a revelation that the tumah or the level of suspicion that we have here is only rabbinic to begin with. The Gemara explains this last point, my taimo. Why is it that a Beis HaPras shenidash is tohor? So, efshur le'etzem kisora shelo nidash bרגל. It's impossible that there would be a bone the size of a barley grain that's still intact after being crushed underfoot. And we alluded to this before, that bones pose a problem only if they have a minimum size of a barley grain. If they're less than that, they don't pose a problem even through contact or moving, and hence if it's been trampled underfoot, there are no bones left there the size of a barley grain. V'ad kan hoyinu boyin b'Shabbos. This was information regarding the tchum extent. Kosovar tchumin derabonan. The feeling here is that the restriction known as tchum, which is 2,000 amos outside of the settled area beyond which one cannot walk on Shabbos, that restriction is rabbinic. So if the individual says that up till here we've now reached the 2,000 amma mark, you would stop at that point. And you again rely on that because you're dealing with an isur that itself is only rabbinic. V'ein ne'emon lomar derech hoya leploni b'mokom hazeh maimer u'misped hoya leploni b'mokom hazeh. We saw this in the Mishnah, that this kind of information, we're not going to rely on what he is telling us now based on what he saw as a minor. My taima, why are we not relying on him? Afuki mamona lo mafkina. When it comes to literally taking money out of one's possession and transferring it to someone else, we don't rely on this kind of testimony. Rather, you would need two people that saw or gained knowledge when they were already adults. Tonu Rabbanan. Now, before we go further, we have a topic heading, Rishima shel dvarim lo yisofim, a list of additional things, Shneimon lo hoyed begodlo mashiro bekotno, that will accept his testimony regarding that which he saw as a minor. Ne'emon tinok hatinok lomar. Tinok literally means as an infant or a toddler, but what we're referring to as an adult is believed to say that which he saw as a minor. Kach omar li abba. Thusly, father told me. And we skip the bracketed section. Within it is information is inaccurate, is an inaccurate text. What is father believed? In other words, what is this? What is the testimony? He said the fellow is saying, father told me, mishpacha zu kshero, mishpacha zu psula. As far as lineage and purity of descent and pedigree considerations, this family is a kosher family, and this family is of questionable lineage. And when we speak about questionable background, you have to understand we're saying there is married into this family as mamzerim, or those are illegitimate individuals or slaves. These are people that are not to marry into the rank and file Jewish community. Now let's go over the section that we skipped, this line in brackets. This family is pure and this family is defiled. The Gemara asks, Tahora utamea salka daitach. What relevance is there to a family being defiled or not defiled? What does that have to do with familyhood? Here the emphasis is on a family. What we can speak about an individual being defiled and then he can't eat truma or he can't eat sacrificial meat. But what do you mean when you say a family is that? So there's something inaccurate about this. Rather, elo mishpacha zu ksheira or mishpacha zu psula. This family is kosher and you can marry into this family and not worry about any lineage pedigree problems. This family, this other family, psula, is unfit. We were at a wedding that had a ktsatsa in it, and later the Gemara will ask what is a ktsatsa. So we'll hold off on that till we get to that in the Gemara later. So he's telling us about a wedding where there was a ktsatsa in the marriage of so-and-so to so-and-so. What relevance that has, and we will see that later. He's telling us that we used to carry our dough tithe, the chalot tithe, and matonos are sections of animals when they're slaughtered that are given to a Kohen. So he's saying that we used to take these portions to so and so. Rashi says v'shahinu molichin v'chulei al yedei atzmoi, and we'll see what that's in the Gemara. The next line of the Gemara, im kach heir hatinok. If the tinok says, if he's telling us what he did as a child, al yodi haya abo sholech lo chalu matanos. The kid would have to say, I was the one that father sent to bring these tithes and gifts that are Kohen related. So now let's go back to the Gemara text. Number 3, we'll read it again. V'shoinu molichim chalu matanos leploni Kohen. Notice we have a colon. Al yedei atzmo. As Rashi says, that information will have validity or importance only if the individual is saying that father told me, he sent me to carry the portions. Avol lo al yedei acher. But if the individual is telling us that I remember father sending these portions through someone else, no, that is not going to have importance to us. We're not going to take that information seriously. The source goes on to tell us other situations of where the initial sighting or the initial witnessing was when they were unqualified to serve as witnesses, similar to our situation of a minor who is also unqualified to testify, but their statement of testimony is after they became full-fledged Jews. So the source says, "V'kulan." All of these cases, im haya oived kechavim v'nizgayer, eved v'nishtachrer, ein ne'emonim. If you're dealing with an idol worshipper who is who converted, so after he converted, he's telling us what he saw when he was still an idol worshipper, or he's telling us what he saw when he was still an eved. Nishtachrer means freed. With becoming freed, he becomes a full-fledged Jew. But here he's telling us information now as a full-fledged Jew, but with what he saw while he was still a slave. So the source says ein amonim, and these two examples of people would not be believed. The ein ne'emon lomar derech haya leploni b'mokom hazeh maimed umisbeid haya leploni b'mokom hazeh. And as we saw before, they are not believed when they say that that so and so had a path, it was so-and-so's path through this area, through this field, nor is the individual believed when he says, Maimed umispeid, there was a section of property outside the cemetery that belonged to so-and-so. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer ne'emonim, they are believed. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, hey, what is Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka going on? He says they are believed. Ilemo aseifa, if you think he's referring to the case in the end of the source of derech haya leploni or maimed misveh leploni. That can't be. Afuki mamonahu. That's a question of money or property transfer. You're assigning, based on this information, property to so and so, which previously was understood to be someone else's. That can't be done unless you have formal, regular, kosher testimony, namely information that was witnessed by an adult. The initial witnessing was done by an adult who's now testifying as a kosher witness, which is not the case here. So to say that there would be believability regarding the cases of Afuki Mamona, that can't be. Elo Amresha. Rather, Rabbi Yochanan Berger is going back to the phrase before. And here the Gemara quotes it. V'kulam im hoya eved im hoya oivei techavim v'nisgayer eved v'nishtacher einem on him. The Tanna Kama said that unlike the case of the minor witnessing and testifying as an adult, where we believe if the witnessing was while they were still Gentiles or still slaves, that they would not be believed. Rabbi Yochanan ben Berger omer nem on him, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Berger says they would be believed. To tell us what they saw when they were non-Jews. What's the underlying point of controversy? Tanakama sovar kiva de ovid kichovimu lo havadek. Since the initial testimony, the initial citing, initial awareness was while he was still an idol worshipper, so he wouldn't be diligent, he wouldn't be careful, he wouldn't be precise. For Rabbi Yochanan Berger, sovar kiva de daite legiri, since you're talking about someone who had in his mind to convert, so it's true when he saw it was pre-conversion, but he intended to become a full-fledged Jew, he intended to convert. So Medak Havadaik, he would be careful even regarding that initial witnessing. Mike Tzotza, we mentioned above that a person is believed to say that he, as a child, he was at a wedding where there was a Tzotza of Bas Ploni Baploni. So here the Gemara gives us the entire background. The Tonu Rabbanan. The Gemara asks, Mike Tzotza the Tonu Rabbanan, what is the case of the Tzotza that we were taught? Ketzad Tzotza. How is that? Echad minu achim shenosa isha sheina hogenes lo. If one of the brothers, a member of the family, married a woman that is not fit for him. When we speak about not fit, that covers a very wide range of possibilities. But for our purposes, it's enough for us to say that one of the brothers married a woman that's not fit for him. And the result of that would be that the children that are born are going to be problematic with regard to all kinds of cases of lineage and family purity. So when a wedding like that would take place, apparently, as is all too common nowadays, the parents were not successful in preventing the marriage. You see, so we say, Ein chodesh tachas hashemesh, there's nothing new. Even in the times of the Gemara, in the times of the Mishnah, you saw weddings that took place against the will of the parents or of the rabbis. So someone went ahead and married a woman that he shouldn't have married. And they made a wedding. The family members will bring a barrel filled with fruits. And they smash the barrel in the middle of an open area. Rechova is a plaza, an open expanse where everyone is present. The Oimrim, and they announce, Achenu Beis Yisrael, Shimu. Fellow Jews, listen. Achinu ploni nosa isha sheina genes lo. Our relative married a woman that's unfit for him. And we're afraid that his offspring will marry amongst our offspring. The marriage of people of questionable descent with those of us who are of pure descent. So notice this sign for future generations, that this event will leave a lasting impression on your minds, that his seed should not marry amongst us. This is the Ktsotza Shatinok Nemon Lohed Oleh, where we say the the child is believed, namely, he sees this as a minor, and he tells us this story after he becomes an adult, and we listen to this, we heed what he is saying. As you can see, we've reached the end of our daf, which is also the end of the second paragraph of Kesubos.